Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and how are you doing? I do hope you're doing very, very well, and that life is treating you kindly. So wherever you are, go and get that really special drink. Dr. Pepper, here we come, always something very spicy. Whatever it is that you enjoy drinking, go and get it, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight that you're really going to love. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I grabbed my sister excitedly, indicating for her to remain very quiet, so as not to draw any attention to either of us. I pointed deliberately towards a silvery stream that meandered through the heavily forested valley with a forceful, rambunctious current, where white, bubbly, foamy waves of water crashed over voluptuous sculptural boulders with a powerful, tenacious determination. The sound of the water so loud that many of the pretty background noises of the chirping and trilling, whistling birds became somewhat faint, almost inaudible, lost against the blasting thrashes of the water. "Look over there! See him?" I said, trying to raise my voice enough for my sister to hear me, as our voices were drowned out by the noises of the water. "Where?" asked my sister. "Where? See what? I can't see anything." She looked frustrated as she peered through the curtain of shrubbery that generously draped the gaps between two trees, rather like a spidery web that overlooked the water. Her sharp, keen eyes looking for something out of place, but the stream, along with a scattering of towering ponderosa pines, looked totally normal. There was nothing that looked different to her, or that grabbed her attention. She frowned, looking at me defeated, conquered by her disappointment, wearing an infuriated expression on her face. "Don't tease me! I don't see anything! Nothing is there! You're not winding me up, are you?" "Of course not, Lucy. Why would I do that? Over there, standing at the edge of the water. Can't you see him?" "But isn't that a tree stump?" My sister followed the line of my finger towards the obscure, dense, hefty form. It looked like a huge, broken tree trunk. "No, silly! That isn't a tree trunk. Can't you see it's moving? See those swaggering branches? They're not branches at all. They're hefty arms. See the head? That's not a stub. That's a distinctive, pronounced head with a distinguishable pointed tip." "Oh, my word!" said my sister, looking stumped. "Oh, by golly! By Jesus, you're right! It's not a tree stump. But what is it? It's moving! It's really moving!" My sister and I were born with curiosity attached to our surname like a double barrel, so neither of us needed much encouragement to surreptitiously creep towards the anomalous sighting. We were familiar with bears. We had seen them on multiple occasions before, but this creature was something decidedly different. What on earth was he? We couldn't even begin to imagine. We were eager to find out the answer to this curious conundrum that had hijacked our immediate interest. We knew we would not be happy until we found out exactly what it was, or we would be left wondering, always speculating about what we'd seen. So there was no time like the present to find the answer. Luckily, I had my small binoculars with me that had been given to me by my grandfather, whom had told me that every aspiring young hunter needs a good view of his quarry. So I wore those field glasses around my neck proudly every day when we went out rambling in the countryside, like an indigenous Indian warrior might wear a necklace of eagle feathers, or perhaps a cannibal would wear a string of human teeth, or worse still, a gruesome display of human digits. Horrible thought, really. So with trembling hands and a degree of trepidation, along with a very pronounced sense of inquisitiveness, I began to focus on the burly, dense, stubby tree trunk that appeared to be some kind of brooding, rather bemused-looking critter that was seemingly heavily preoccupied with something on the edge of the stream. Perhaps he was looking to catch a fish, I thought. Maybe a bass. I'd seen a lot of sizable bass in the stream. The water was so crystal clear, it was easy to see the fish darting through the water. The current was so vigorous, and at times often treacherous. If you were small, it wouldn't take much to be swept away by this somewhat lethal white water. "Oh, my God! "Oh my God!" I said to my sister, my eyes growing round with excitement as if the dawn had been suddenly broken by a revelatory blazing bright light. "I think it's a Bigfoot! I think it's a Bigfoot!" "Let's see," said my sister, exuberantly snatching the binoculars from me. Shaking like a leaf, she applied the lenses to her own eyes, while assiduously adjusting the focus. She nodded excitedly. "It's a Bigfoot! It's a Bigfoot!" She was virtually jumping up and down on her little legs with such incredible enthusiasm, rather reminding me of a boisterous puppy that can't stop bouncing between your legs. "Oh my golly! It's a Bigfoot!" I wasted no time in recovering my binoculars from my riveted sister, who seemed hell-bent on monopolizing them for herself. A far cry from the girl who'd initially concluded that binoculars were a naff gift. Now she seemingly wanted ownership of them. That was not going to happen. I consumed and immersed myself in studying the creature curiously through the binoculars. I perceived it must have been exceedingly tall, as the water in the stream came up to his knees. The wet hair of his lower limbs clung to his sizable muscular legs, exposing the grey skin beneath. It wasn't very shallow in that spot, as I had learnt from my own personal experience, having nearly drowned there once myself. I vividly recalled that time that I'd been forcefully pushed backwards by the powerful current and almost swept down the water. So I guess he was easily over 7 to 8 foot tall, definitely male, with a solid dense body, as stocky, robust and burly as a redwood tree. Even the fine layers of his dark reddish-brown hair that swathed his body was a colour that was identical to the colour of the illustrious bark, so much so that he would have been perfectly camouflaged by the redwood trees in our woodgrove. So perfectly, in fact, that if you were to walk through the sylvan while the creature remained as still as a statue, you would never have even known he was actually there. We had hit pay dirt in seeing him at all. We knew we were exceedingly lucky. We'd seen enough television programmes of intrepid explorers and their arduous, relentless feats and insufferable journeys over treacherous, sometimes precarious terrain, all in hot pursuit of the elusive, hairy humanoid beast that could slip through your field of vision faster than butter. What's more, many of these passionate adventurers had applied savvy procedures, using the advantages of modern technology, thermal night vision, calls and wood knocks, in order to lure in a Bigfoot like an unsuspecting fish to a fisherman's worm. More often than not, they would invariably leave empty-handed, their hearts heavy laden with bitter disappointment, their faces downcast, but a glimmer of hope always hung in their mind like a bright gleaming star. Maybe tomorrow would be different. The tragedy for most was that tomorrow never was different. It would seem the more you searched for the outlandish beast, the more it eluded you, like an annoying, frustrating game of cat and mouse. Even being young and naive, and possibly a tad foolish at the time, I still perceived that this was indeed an extreme honour, to have such an outlandish encounter with a hairy man like this. I was enthralled, captivated, prepossessed by his striking, profound humanness, as I was under the impression Bigfoot was very ape-like, but I did not find this to be the case, for this creature was more like a wild man than an ape. His pyramid-shaped head turned to look in our direction, his eyes perceptibly intelligent. Did he know where we were hiding, I wondered? Had he seen us, or could he sense my field glasses upon him, studying him with a fierce, ferocious intensity? I could feel my heart thumping violently in my chest, my excitement escalating through my veins like a speeding train galloping through a dark tunnel. I noticed that even my breathing had sharpened to a swift speediness, as if I had swum hundreds upon hundreds of laps around my grandparents' kidney-shaped swimming pool, and was completely exhausted as a result. "It's a Bigfoot," I whispered. "I know it is." We watched the creature as it arched its Titanic-sized body over the water, pulling something from beneath the watery depths with his overlong, muscular arms. I could see him tugging and pulling at the water. Had he caught a bass or a catfish, I wondered? Then I saw it. Nothing prepared me for what I was about to witness. The memory of that moment is permanently seared in my mind, like a sailor's tattoo that can't be shifted. At first it looked like an arm that was limply attached to a soaked, sodden, dishevelled corpse of a woman, with very wet, tousled red hair, whom was dressed in a drenched, sullied, woolly green dress. The rumpled dress appeared to be saturated with red stains of blood that surprisingly had not been washed away by the swift current, but seemed to be stuck to her chest as if she'd been gashed to death with a violent force, possibly by one of the creature's powerfully large hands that could easily outrival the rounded bottom of a professional tennis racket. I imagine one blow from his hand would leave you unconscious. 2 strikes and you were definitely a goner. Not to put too fine a point on it, of course. My sister and I looked at each other in absolute terror, as if the enormity of what we had witnessed for us was like a landmine blowing off in our faces. My sister was wobbling uneasily, rather like an unsteady tray of delicate champagne glasses being brought back to the kitchen during a drinks party. "He's killed her," she cried. "He's only gone and throttled the poor woman to death, under the water like a crocodile. He's going to eat her. I know he is. If he sees us, he could eat us too." This, of course, was a horrifying revelation, but even I doubted that the Bigfoot would eat both the lady with the red hair, followed by me and my sister. But then maybe, like a crocodile, he'd kill his prey first, leave it to marinate in its juices, to soften for a few days, and then consume it. After all, isn't that what crocodiles did? Why would it be any different for him? It was all we could do not to scream at the top of our lungs, but such a careless, indiscreet act would have been very foolish, for it would have alerted the very astute, vigilant creature to our presence, subsequently propelling us like a BB gun into the heart of grievous danger. It would seem that our bodies were blasted like dynamite, as explosive surges of adrenaline coursed through our veins, activating the engine of our joints involuntarily. Our seemingly well-oiled legs gained momentum, finding a speed that neither of us had ever experienced before or since. A miraculous, phenomenal driving force, powered by fear, that would have made a skateboard seem slow and clumsy. We ran and ran towards our grandparents' colonial farmhouse, the air expunged from our lungs as we collapsed on the grassy verge like 2 half-drowned people, gasping to find any breath, grabbing desperately at the long grass to stabilize our trembling knees, to bring equilibrium and balance back, to steady our frazzled nerves. My grandfather, who was chopping firewood at the time, abandoned his gallant endeavours, hurrying speedily towards us like an ambulance in heavy traffic, his face so pale he looked like a ghost. "What happened? What happened, kids? Did you see a mountain lion? Was it a bear? You look so afraid. What the heck scared you half to death?" We shook our heads, trying to find the words, but they eluded us, stuck in the back of our throats like a cough lozenge that refused to budge. "Come with me. You've had a nasty shock." My grandmother was at the range, stirring a pot of corn chowder vigorously. She looked up when we entered the kitchen. Her cheerful expression was vanquished the moment she saw our terrified faces that trembled while our bodies jiggled, our legs becoming increasingly unstable. The kitchen seemed to sway, rock and wobble like a jolting fisherman's boat on a choppy, tumultuous ocean. "What happened? Oh, my God! What happened? Are you all right?" She clucked. She waddled around us in a dreadful state, like a devoted, rather frenzied mother duck, upset by the sight of a fox loitering around the stream, who was terrorizing her little ducklings and getting very indignant and heated up all about it. "Give them something sweet, dear. They're both in shock," said my grandfather. Before long, my grandmother had poured us long glasses of icy-cold Coca-Cola, placing large chocolate brownies in front of us that in normal circumstances would have been gulped up in a second with a rapturous zeal. This was a turn-up for the books, as we were never normally allowed sweet things before meals. Today the boundaries of that hard and fast golden rule had come crashing down like a crumbling dam wall. We gratefully drank our colas in silence, eating our decadent brownies without saying a word, enjoying the sweet, rich taste on our tongues. Nothing could have been more gratifying in that moment, as the calmness descended over me like the soft rain after a hectic storm. Finally I spoke. We were playing hide-and-seek. We saw a Bigfoot by the stream. He killed a woman. He drowned her in the water. She had blood on her, lots of it, on her torso." My grandmother gasped at our morbid revelations. A predatory mountain lion stealthily loitering around would not be good news, but her 2 grandchildren physically witnessing a murder so graphically was not what she was expecting to hear from us. It unsettled her nerves, rattled her cage significantly, brought up the bitter taste of gall at the back of her throat, leaving her feeling violently sick. Only moments before, the delicious-looking corn chowder bubbling away on the gas hob had brought on those salivatory hunger signals that gallivanted through her brain, accompanied by a rumbling stomach. But now looking at it made her want to throw up and be violently ill. She knew she'd never be able to feel positive about corn chowder ever again. It had permanently lost its appeal. Her expression looked appalled. She was now shaking. Her unsteady, trembling hands were flung around her mouth in a gesture of nonplussed disbelief. "You witnessed a murder? You saw a young woman being killed? Oh, my God! Oh, my God!" I nodded. "A Bigfoot? You saw a Bigfoot? You saw him drown this poor helpless woman? I wonder who on earth she was, where she came from, what she was doing in our part of the woods." "What are we to do?" my grandmother cried, crippled by the rising level of angst that had seized her sense of reason, like a robber holding her to ransom. For a moment she looked confused, disorientated, overwhelmed, out of her depth, almost as if she'd been thrown into the deep end of a swimming pool when she couldn't swim a single stroke. "I'll get on to the sheriff pronto," said my grandfather, tapping his cell phone vigorously. "That's what we must do, call the sheriff. There's a dangerous Bigfoot out there. He needs to be taken out." "What about Fish and Game?" asked my grandmother. "Should you not call them? I mean, we're talking about a murderous Bigfoot, are we not? He's only gone and killed a poor woman, drowned her of all things. Could it get worse than that? I ask you, could it get worse than that? We can't have a monster hovering around the woods like this, especially not one that has a taste for human flesh. Next thing he'll be after us, extracting us from our home like a couple of sardines from a can. Then there'll be no stopping him. I do know that human flesh is supposed to taste exactly like pork, sweet. It might be delicious to him, succulent, tender. We're sitting ducks for the creature. It's only a matter of time before he pounces on us unaware." "I will tell the sheriff that my grandchildren saw a woman being drowned in the stream by an obscure, indistinct figure. If you think I'm going to ramble on to them about a Bigfoot, you've got another thing coming. They'd never take me seriously. I'm not about to admit anything of the sort. Let's just hope their fastidious investigations will lead them directly to the predator. Let them do all the conjecture and groundwork themselves, not me. Let them determine the murderous villain was a Bigfoot. But that erroneous word is not coming out of my mouth, not for a moment." "I still think you should call Fish and Game," piped my grandmother. But her voice faded, as if she too was not certain on what the next move should actually be. "One thing at a time, sweetheart. One thing at a time. Let's not run before we can walk, shall we? Let's see what the sheriff has to say in regards to the matter." Before long, several police trucks with flashing blue lights, along with an ambulance, arrived on the scene. "Please go to the woods," said my grandfather as he spoke to some of the uniformed men. "You need to go into the woods. Follow the hiking trail over there, near the stream, on the right-hand side. That's where my grandkids say they saw the deceased woman. Regretfully, the indistinguishable figure that drowned her. They didn't see very well, I'm afraid, but he could still be loitering around. By all accounts, he was exceedingly big. I would proceed with caution if I were you. As I was saying, he might still be loitering around those woods, so be very careful. He could be armed and dangerous." That was my grandfather's way of warning them to be very, very guarded. I watched several policemen running stealthily into the woods, their revolvers cocked, their expressions determined. "Might I have a word with our two young witnesses?" asked the sheriff. "Do you think they might be up to answering a few questions for me? It would be a great help in our investigation. Eyewitnesses are crucial, even if their testimonies are notoriously unreliable. But I need to establish some hard base facts." "Please, Sheriff," said my grandmother, "be my guest. My grandchildren have had a nasty shock, as you can imagine, but I'm sure they'll oblige you by answering a few questions." She said this, gesturing for the sheriff to sit down at the booth opposite us, which he did so unhesitantly, without much prompting. More Coke, my grandmother asked me. I nodded. And you, Lucy? Would you like some more Coke? My sister nodded. How about you, Sheriff? A fizzy glass of Coca-Cola? Coffee? Tea? Anything, she asked. A fizzy glass of cola would do very nicely, said the Sheriff. Not that my waistline will agree with that. My wife tirelessly complains about my sugar addiction. But you can see why sugar is a quintessential part of the job as a sheriff. For in horrifying situations like this, quite simply, nothing else will do. Sugar may be many things, but nothing beats it for steadying the nerves, let me assure you. Now, son, what is your name? Asked the Sheriff, looking at me directly through his steely blue eyes, pulling out his pad and pen to make a few brief notes. My name is Wesley Bonnet, sir. This is my sister Lucinda, but we call her Lucy for short. I see, said the Sheriff, pulling off his cowboy hat, placing it beside him on the booth. I noticed his hair was shaved within an inch of his life, but the spiky hairs glistened from the heated sweat generated from wearing a hat. And how old are you, Wesley? I'm 11. My sister's 10. Now exactly what did you see? Try to think about it all very slowly, so the details become very clear in your mind. Think of it as if you're describing a picture to me, a work of art, maybe a picture you've drawn. What do you see? I trembled awkwardly on my words, abiding my grandfather's rigid advice to avoid mentioning the Bigfoot at any cost. Sir, I saw the dead body of the woman. She was being dragged from beneath the lake. At first it was her arm, followed by the rest of her body. She was covered in lots and lots and lots of blood. She was being murdered under the water, sir. Did you see her receive the lethal blow that caused all this bleeding? No, but I saw the man. I didn't see him clearly, sir, but he was dragging her out of the water once he'd killed her. You've done very well, son. Can you remember a distinguishing feature of the perpetrator? Large, you say? He asked, raising a questioning brow. And hairy, piped my sister. Hairy! Lots and lots of brown hair! At that precise, poignant moment, a police officer raced into the kitchen, causing all eyes to focus directly on him. He seemed flustered, excited, as though he had ants in his pants, almost as if he was bursting at the seams to give the Sheriff some juicy inside information. Had he spotted the Bigfoot, I wondered? Might I have a word, Sheriff? He said. Something's come up of significance. The Sheriff nodded, while the uniformed officer whispered into the Sheriff's ears. I thought I heard the words, red hair, green dress. I almost thought I heard the man snigger, as a muffled snort emanated from his mouth, as if he was desperately trying to suppress a giggle. On hearing the man's whispering confession, the corner of the Sheriff's mouth twitched as he struggled to suppress a very big grin. Did this woman you saw, by any chance, lying there deceased, did she happen to be wearing a green jersey dress? Did she have red hair? We nodded. That's right. That's her, sir. Clear as day. At that, the Sheriff nodded at the officer, as if giving him the go-ahead in regards to some outlandish mission. The man dutifully returned into our kitchen, dragging behind him a large life-size bedraggled mannequin, like the ones you see gracing the front windows of Macy's, sporting some new designer wear. Is this what you saw? Asked the Sheriff, lifting up a sodden mannequin with red hair that was attired in a green dress, with what appeared to be bright red splashes of red paint across the front that looked from a distance remarkably like blood. Had all this been a horrible set-up, some kind of macabre twisted joke, I wondered. The mannequin was alarmingly lifelike. I'd never seen one look so human before. I felt so embarrassed. The blood rushed to my cheeks. Now I was beginning to feel really silly. Really silly. I nodded. That's her, sir. I didn't realise she was a doll. We didn't realise. She looked so real, sir. So real. Especially from a distance. The Sheriff burst out laughing, as did the other officer, joined by my grandmother and grandfather. The Sheriff had one of those infectious laughs that sounded like an owl hoot, combined with a coyote bark, that was so hilarious that the kitchen was just filled with laughter, as no one was able to suppress their heightened giggles. The mannequin not being a dead body was funny, but the Sheriff's laughter was funnier still, as his chest spurted like a whale's spout, eliminating sounds that were so comical even a stone statue would not have been immune. "Oh, my God, this is so funny," said the sheriff. "In all my born days, I've never laughed this much." He wiped the tears away from his eyes. "Wait until the missus, the wife, hears about this. This story will be discussed at every dinner party in the foreseeable future. One thing you can never accuse me of is having a boring job. Being a sheriff keeps you on your toes, even if you are fishing out the unsuspecting corpse of a bedraggled mannequin from a stream." Once again the sheriff appeared tickled pink by his own twinkling remarks that glittered with humour. He let out another one of his hooting laughs. While my grandfather was laughing so much that his body was virtually doubled over. "Please, someone," he begged, "stop me from laughing so much. My stomach is bloody killing me. If I laugh any more, I'm going to bloody explode." After the sheriff and his team had finally left, relief flooded my grandparents' cosy Californian home like a warm shower on a sunny day. It did not make me and Lucy feel particularly good, for we felt that the adults were laughing at our expense. Needless to say that apart from the mannequin, both my grandparents genuinely were impressed that we had encountered a Bigfoot. I'm pleased to say they did not doubt our account, as my grandmother herself had once had a random sighting of one when hanging out her washing to dry one sunny afternoon. She said the creature had appeared curious, watching her for a long while, and disappearing back into the heart of the woods. "I think we're dealing with a curious Bigfoot," she surmised, ferreting around the stream, stumbling across a mannequin. But what on earth was a lifelike doll doing in the stream? What was all that red paint about on the dress that looked specifically like blood, as if it had been strategically placed for maximum effect? It's decidedly bizarre. I feel as if we're bang in the middle of an Agatha Christie novel. Little did we realise that answers to those rather enigmatic, curious questions would soon hasten their approach. I think it must have been about the second last day of our stay on my grandparents' beguiling Californian farm before we were headed back to Los Angeles to resume our city lives with our parents. We much preferred it out here in the vibrant, viridescent countryside, under the magnificent awning of a cobalt blue sky, surrounded by the mystical, statuesque, masterful redwood trees and ancient, giant secular groves. It must have been drawing close to lunchtime. My sister and I were playing with jigsaw puzzles on the booth, while my grandmother was busying herself stirring a huge vat of macaroni cheese on the range, rolling up meatballs. The smell of melted cheese and fried onions wafted around the kitchen. In a trice we heard the sound of a large truck rolling down the driveway. Its tyres squeaked as they scrunched pebbles beneath hefty, substantial rubber upholstering. The truck ground to a swift halt. A door slammed behind it as the passenger exited the vehicle, and finally the clip-clop of women's sandals could be distinguished as they approached our front door. A knocking sound of the brass horseshoe knocker could be heard, beating against the wood, followed by the shrill whistle of the doorbell that coursed through the house like an irritating siren. "Who's that?" said my grandmother, washing the excess stickiness off her fingers, drying them swiftly on a cloth attached to her apron. She bustled hurriedly towards the front door. "Oh, do come in, Priscilla," said my grandmother, directing the poised, very elegant woman into the kitchen. She was very glamorous. She was a glamorous grandmother if I ever saw one. Her whiter-than-white hair was tied back in a neat coiled bun. Her flawless pale skin looked like it had been stroked within an inch of its life, with copious tender loving treatments at a beauty salon. For the wrinkles, if there had been any, had abandoned her face like a herd of wild horses. The woman walked like a ballerina, an elegant gait, a straight deportment, a graceful walk. If I was to compare her to the animal species, she was like an Afghan hound visiting a couple of juvenile rambunctious Jack Russells, that being me and my sister, of course, and a jovial bulldog, the bulldog being my grandmother. "Now this is a surprise, Priscilla," said my grandmother. "Why, I do not believe you've ever graced the threshold of our home before. To what do we owe this unexpected pleasure?" "I just need a brief word," said Priscilla, biting her perfectly painted bright orange lips together rather awkwardly. "I feel I owe you an explanation about, well, you know, the strange body you found floating in the stream that, well, wasn't a body, if you understand what I'm talking about." "You know about that?" asked my grandmother. "Oh, doesn't news travel around fast in these parts? You have me intrigued." "Please sit down here with my grandkids. This is my grandson Wesley, and this is his sister Lucy. They're staying with me for the holidays. They were the ones that saw the doll that they falsely assumed was a dead body. It was an easy mistake to make, because it was one of the best mannequins we've ever seen in our lives." Oh dear, said Priscilla. "What I put you through! The police, the ambulance, the false alarm. Oh, I'm so sorry." She said this clasping her hands around her head in a gesture of despair. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. None of this is your fault, Priscilla," said my grandmother. "Goodness gracious, woman. Besides anything, we did have a very good laugh about it." "Oh, but it is my fault," Priscilla insisted. "Can I get you something to drink, Priscilla?" "That would be very nice. Anything you've got going would be lovely." "I'll make you a cup of tea. English breakfast would be nice." "Oh, it smells good in here. All that melted cheese. It's making my stomach positively rumble." "Well, if that's the case, Priscilla, I insist that you stay for lunch with us. I think I'll give you a glass of white wine. It complements cheese superbly." "If you're sure," said Priscilla, "I would be mad to refuse you." After my mother had poured Priscilla a large glass of Sauvignon Blanc, after a few sips she seemed to be a lot calmer. "I'll start at the very beginning, shall I? Well, when I was a lot younger, I worked in a fabulously prestigious boutique in Los Angeles. I was in my early 20s at the time. Most of our clients were movie stars, people with lots and lots of money. The mannequins in the shop were absolutely incredible, so lifelike, so magnificently beautiful. Even some of our customers believed we actually had live women in the window modelling our clothes. That's how lifelike they were. I sold a dress to Elizabeth Taylor once. I think it was an electric blue natty shift number. It looked absolutely fabulous on her, suited her perma tan, brought out her purple eyes. Then Audrey Hepburn, well, she was a very keen shopper of ours. She loved our Pixie range of clothes. The chic gamin style with its Hubert Givenchy influences rarely suited her look rather remarkably. Anyway, when I left that boutique to get married, my boss wanted to give me a gift. I didn't hesitate. I wanted the red-haired mannequin in the window that I'd called Layla. I was amazed when my boss agreed to give her to me. You see, I'm a bit of a seamstress. I knew that Layla could be useful for some of my design projects. I was hoping to start up my own clothing line, but marriage got in the way of that, and also the distraction of raising your own children. Anyway, my daughter Christina married an aspiring film producer in Hollywood. He always got his son, which is my grandson Clarkson, to take part as an extra in movies, stuff like that, so he got very involved with Universal Studios. Well, about a week ago, my grandson, with a few of his young friends, came to stay at my home. I agreed to it against my better judgment. I didn't know what a handful they would turn out to be, but that's besides the point. The kids decided they wanted to play cops and robbers, but my grandson insisted that they needed a proper body with real blood in order to make the scene graphically real to merit a true police investigation. You see, with the influences of Universal Studios having rubbed off on him, he had become exposed to the makeup and costumes, so he wanted the game to have some semblance of reality. All the kids, of course, naturally thought this was a fabulous idea. "We need a dead body," my grandson insisted. "How can we arrest a thug if we haven't got a dead body?" That was when Clarkson remembered my mannequin. He asked me if I had some red paint and an old dress that I didn't want, so the paint could be used on the dress to denote the presence of blood, to make the scene visually graphic. I was to discover that during the game of cops and robbers, they had decided that the body should be found floating in the stream. But the current was so rambunctious, Layla was unfortunately swept away. They couldn't catch her. "I see," said my grandmother. "I think that explains an awful lot, as how that lifelike doll was swept downstream, ending up in our watering hole." And so it was the pieces began to fit together very nicely. But even though the doll we established was not real, the Bigfoot most certainly was. I only regret the fact that I falsely concluded he was responsible for an insidious crime that he most certainly did not commit. In reality, all the Bigfoot was guilty of was retrieving a large mannequin-like doll from the water. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.